Welcome to the 4x4 Canada podcast. I'm your host, Wes. And tonight we've got a really special guest. Tonight we've got Mike Harrison out of Ontario. And he has restored the Big Bad and Bouncy monster truck. It was one of the first monster trucks in Canada. And Mike, I'm sure you'll let me know if it was the first. We'll get into that in a second. But I want to thank you for coming on. You've been four-wheeling and mud bogging for a long time. And I'm looking forward to talking about some of the stories that you got from previous as well as now. I know you're into some of the big trucks now as well, too. So looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm looking forward to that as well.
So I'm just before we get into it, I just want to touch base. Last week, we were talking with Josh and Vanessa from Destined for Wild on Instagram and YouTube. And they're a young couple that took their 80 series Land Cruiser from British Columbia down to Argentina over the course of 9 months. So really great story. If you guys go back and check it out, I'll be honest with you, it was one of the most enjoyable ones I've had in regards to just talking about places I haven't been. I've never been to South America or Central America, and just a young, lovely couple. I had a lot of fun. The BC Overland Rally was last weekend, and they're one of the guest speakers on the Saturday night there. And it was really neat to see them out and talking with people. If you guys are into that kind of stuff, go back and check it out because it was a lot of fun doing that one. Next week, we have a interview with Wild Safe BC, and we're going to talk about the Bear Aware program as well as what to do when you come across bears and what to do so you don't come across bears and other animals. For all you outdoor enthusiasts, it's definitely worth a listen. We got a lot of really neat information coming up about being outdoors and sharing the outdoors with our animals. In the meantime, let's go back to Mike. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully we can share some fun stories and maybe enlighten somebody.
So before we get too far, I want to throw it out there. Your guys' YouTube channel is Mud Dancer Farms, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
I didn't actually realize until we were talking earlier that was your channel. And I know you guys got a lot of old school videos up there as well, too. So some of the mud bogs from the early days of four-wheeling and that in Ontario. So to our listeners, go back and check it out. It's just some good old school mud bog and having fun kind of idea, right? So check them out at Mud Dancer Farms on YouTube. We'll drop that link in the show notes as well.
Yeah, the one video, if somebody from BC can watch it, it's some old school videos that of some wheeling up in BC, and it would just be interesting to see if some of those guys are still in the know. I have no idea how I got the footage or where it came from, but it would just be interesting to see if somebody remembers those trucks.
For sure. And I meant to check it on before I came out, but I'm pretty sure I know some of the video that you're talking about. And it's just neat to look back at some of those. I mean, I'm an old school guy. I run Off-Road Racing Canada history group on Facebook. And I know you've shared some photos and that up there, but I'm an old school guy. I love the old school stuff. I think I was born a little too late and to be in it in the heyday, but yeah, I love all that old school stuff for sure. So you've been wheeling for a long time. You're an old boy like me.
Yeah, and I got my driver's license in '86, and I started sneaking around wheeling in my dad's two-wheel drive Mazda pickup truck, and that's really how it got started. There was a group of us and one of us had a four-wheel drive, and then come home and explain to Dad how come his truck was covered in mud. Oh, the backboards were really dirty today. And that's really how it began. So I'm 54 years old now, and I started when I was 16, and the trucks have gotten bigger, and so has my belly.
I'm in the same boat as you. I'm 52, and yeah, the trucks have gotten bigger over time, and my belly has as well. So I'm right there with you. So what was your first 4x4?
My first 4x4 was a 77 Ford stepside, and
Nice.
I bought it from a guy who was into wheeling, so it was already lifted. It was on 36-inch Firestone TXs, that's some old school tires there.
Yeah.
And it was a good old truck, and we had it for a while, and it got me the taste, and it got me in with a group of guys that were into bigger trucks, and some of the people that were two-wheel drive guys with me, they grew as well, and it got to the point where we had a crew that went out every weekend with the 5, 6, 7 trucks, and ranging from 35s to 44s, and it was fun. It was different. I miss those days.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on that. It's hard to explain it for some of the young people these days, but it is different. And yeah, I miss those days as well too. It was just a how to word it exactly, but it's a lot easier to have fun.
Everyone, we go to the tread lightly thing, and we did tread lightly. Like we were
Yeah.
respectful, but yet there was lots of non-maintenance roads and trails. And over the years, the roads got cleaned up or took over or turned into walking paths. And over here in Ontario, you would have never heard of it, but outside Angus was a place called Menacing Swamp, and it was thousands and thousands of acres, and it was some of the best wheeling you could ever imagine. And once you were past the Iron Bridge, you were on your own, and it was amazing. Unfortunately, Ducks Unlimited took over it, and they're doing a wonderful job of maintaining the nature part of it. But they took the trucks out of the equation, and I personally think that they could have done a lot more with it. They could have a nature trail where the trucks could still go for the 100 feet of trail that in 4,000 acres of swamp. And that's why I said the world's changing. It's tougher. It's really the good old days of, at least around here, firing up your truck and cruising down to the local mud hole are pretty near gone.
Yeah, and a lot of places are all houses now too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember places that I four-wheeled that, yeah, are a city now.
Yeah,
And that's,
exactly.
and you guys are blessed out there with some beautiful country and still lots of trails. And it's not that we're not too. Northern Ontario is fantastic, and it's just different. I miss it.
Yeah, it is. My co-host Trisha, she's working night shift tonight, so she wasn't able to join us, but she lives in Mississauga, and she's out going up to Minden and all those places, and there's still some good trails out there. And
Black Mountain and Phil's are two awesome places. I haven't been there much. I haven't been to either one of those places, to be honest, but I haven't gone up north much. I'm trying to come around to the rocks and that type of trail riding. It's hard for an old school mud bogger.
you're one of those people that love the mud, and it is what it is. And I think you're weird for it because I hate the mud, but
as I get older, I'm not sure I like cleaning it as much.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's the one big thing I don't like about it, but it's still fun to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had the Ford and you're hopping on 37s and that. And what are some of your other early rigs that you had?
I've had a multitude of trucks that I went through. I'd build them, I'd fix them up, and then I'd sell them. But when rigs really took off for me, I had a 79 Ford F-250 that we put on 39.5 boggers, and we called it Mud Dancer. That's where Mud Dancer Farms comes from. And that was pretty near the beginning, and it was a good truck, but it had its quirks. And then in about 2001, I met a young man from Alliston who was building a big Chevy on 44s, and he was sparing no expense. And I was about 10 years older than him, but he was very knowledgeable and really a smart kid. And he built this fantastic Chevy called Slightly Modified.
Okay. Yep.
And he came to me one day and he said, Mike, I want out of the trucks. I want to buy a motorbike. And I said, you're foolish, Dave. I said, you've bought this truck. You've poured your life into it. So I said to him, you want to buy a bike? I said, I'll buy the truck from you. So I purchased the truck. And unfortunately, a week later, he passed away on the motorcycle.
Oh, no.
So I held on to that truck for a really long time. And then a friend of mine came and asked me if he could purchase it. And he was a guy that I trusted to respect the history of it. And that's one thing you'll find with me through all my trucks. It's all about history. And that's why I like things like when we go back to Bouncy and we go to Sasquatch and those things. The funny thing with this slightly modified truck is the person I sold to had it for 20 years. He called me up last year and said, I need to sell it. So it is now back here. We brought
full circle, eh?
Yeah. It's an 84 Chev big block Dana 60 truck on 44-inch swampers, and It's almost identical today as the day they dropped it off to him.
That is so cool.
And my son's truck, that's his baby now.
You say it's still in the original shape kind of idea. Basically, just going to run it and go forward. Are you guys doing a little bit of resto work to it
Nope,
or mods to it?
we're running it as it is. If to be honest, I think the guy probably gave it back to us in better shape than we gave it to him. So
That's for any better than that.
no, he definitely maintained the history on it, and that's what matters to me. It really is about the history of some of these trucks.
So speaking about history, let's hop into the Big Bad and Bouncy monster truck. So I know a bit about it. From my understanding, it like 80s Chevy kind of idea, right on 66. And it was probably one of the first monster trucks in Canada. And I know that Dave Hopkins from Belleville owned it and sold it to you. But maybe fill us in a bit more about the Big Bad and Bouncy monster truck.
Okay, no, you're 100% right. It was an 80 Chev short box on 66s, full planetary 5-ton Rockwells with PS 205 planetary outers, big block 468. And yeah, you're 100% right. Dave Hopkins was the original owner and builder. He took a lot of pride in it. It actually took a lot for him to sell the truck. He really didn't want to, but he was in a bad position. He had nowhere to store it, nowhere to keep it. And it had been under a tarp for 10 or 12 years. It was definitely not doing it any justice. So we came to an arrangement and I brought it home, and it was a labor of love. It took about 5 years, but we took it right down. Other than taking the frame and axles out of it, we took everything off, motor, everything, blasted the frame, redid the body, went through everything, and pretty much brought it back to almost showroom condition. Even the lettering and decals were all hand painted back onto it. And it turned out really well. We took it down to the Monster Truck Hall of Fame Museum. It went on display there for 6 months in Indiana. Great place if you're ever in the States and you get the opportunity. It's definitely worth checking out. And
yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about it for sure. So Big Bad Bouncy, absolutely gorgeous truck. I have to admit, it's the white and lots of chrome, and it was a typical 80s monster truck.
Absolutely. It looked like Canadian Tire threw up on it. It had everything on it.
But yeah, it was a beautiful truck. Every time I see pictures, and I'd follow you through the process of your restoration on it, and like you said, right down to hand painting the decals back on, or the lettering and all that on, and yeah, you did a wonderful job. Absolutely gorgeous truck.
Yeah, I sold it. It was just too much work for me. I was basically by myself at the time, and wrestling 1,000-pound tires and stuff like that. It was just too much for me, and I couldn't show it the way that I wanted to show it. And I was handed a deal of cards that I wanted to make sure it went to a good home, and this guy sold me a bill of goods, and I wouldn't say that it got abused, but it didn't go to what I was thought. So it ended up being used as a display at an RV dealership. And so all the hand painting and stuff got covered up with RV dealership stickers. And then it sat out on the side of the road for 2 years.
That's got to be heartbreaking for you.
Especially, and it's local. I drove by it often. And then it has changed hands, and it's now inside. It is for sale if anybody's looking to buy it, or anybody wants to start a GoFundMe page. I'll gladly bring it. Let's just it's on the cards for me right now to go bring it home. I could have it in the driveway tomorrow if I really needed it or wanted it. Hate to say not want.
When you had it up for sale, I thought about it, and I'm like, what am I going to, same thing as you. I don't have the space for it. And in reality, what am I going to do with it? I've always wanted to do a 4-wheel drive museum, Canadian based kind of idea. And I'm just like, that's just, out of the pocketbook for me to do. Right. So when you did sell it, I was just as sad as you were, I think, almost when you did let it go.
I feel like I almost got ostracized out of the monster truck community by letting it go. I had a lot of friends that I talked to in that group, and they all dissipated once the truck was gone. So it was a double-edged sword. At the time I was happy the truck was going somewhere. I got the money I was asking for it, and then it turns around and it didn't really get treated the way I wanted to see it get treated, and then it And then I lost, I shouldn't say I lost friends, but I lost in that community.
Yeah.
But I understand it's a community about monster trucks, and I don't have a monster truck.
You were rebuilding it for those 4 years or 5 years. So you're constantly doing updates and about it
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely. And
people
I
keep
would
in
do
touch
another one
and
in a heartbeat if I could. To be honest with you, the restoration of it was more enjoyable than the actual owning of it. I've said to a couple of these guys in the States that have ones that are sitting, and there's some guys down in California and stuff that have 4 and 5 of them that they want to restore. If you want to send one up here, I'll put it back together for you.
yeah, yeah, for
You know,
sure.
because I get more enjoyment out of that than I do and I think I know my way around them decently.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
you've got
know?
enough experience, right? And that's the thing too, is a lot of guys are like that in regards to enjoy the time in the garage. They enjoy the time working on the machines and doing the history research and all that. I get a lot of guys are that way.
And absolutely, that was part of the enjoyment was researching a sticker, or there'd been many changes over that truck as it evolved, and things like it did have a tilt box on it at the beginning, and then due to racing regulations, they had to remove the tilt box. So I wanted the tilt box, so I had to go back through it and figure out how to do it and where we're going to mount a hydraulic pump and stuff like that. And that part of just the thinking about it and making it clean and tidy was it's probably one of my best accomplishments in my life. It's-
It's absolutely gorgeous truck. And like I say, to our listeners, check it out. Big Bad and Bouncy, whether you search on Facebook or on the internet. There's lots of great pictures of the truck. A beautiful job on the rebuild for sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's just been probably one of my greatest accomplishments besides my family and my kids.
Yeah. No, it makes sense to me for sure. So you recently posted some photos of Big Bad and Bouncy as a smaller truck. Was that the same truck that evolved into Big Bad and Bouncy?
And that is my understanding. Dave is a bit of a recluse, so it's really hard to get information from him and find out exactly that those pictures were actually taken, and I think he has taken it down, but he had a page dedicated to Big Bad and Bouncy, and those were pictures that were in his archive that
Gotcha.
because basically when I knew he was going to delete it, so I just downloaded all his pictures so that at least I would have them for documentation.
So I know we've talked about it being one of the first monster trucks in Canada. Definitely the first in Ontario, I'd say for sure.
Yeah, it is debatable whether it is the first one in Canada. It's definitely in the top 2 or 3. Back then, nobody really kept track, so there's no real history of it. But my understanding of that Bouncy started life in about 1983.
Okay. So around the same time period, Trevor with Swamp Rat out of BC was right in that
Yeah.
same time period as well. So I know people have both called either one of them the first monster truck in Canada.
Yeah, and I was going to say that was one of those two. I would say one of the two is the first, and yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly.
It's right up there. So
Yeah.
now Trevor, he's out of the Kootenays here in BC, and he's still got the Swamp Rat, and it's sitting tucked away. I know you'd love to get your hands on that one for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And that's another Chevy. So for our listeners, Mike and I are talking about this as if everybody else knows, but there was another monster truck in BC called Swamp Rat, and it was a maroon and gray. It ran on 48s, and then he's one of the first trucks to go on 66s, from my understanding, in North America. And it's just, unfortunately, just sitting there in the Kootenays in BC, and I know exactly where it is, but I would love, that's another one I'd love to get on my hands on too and do a full restoration on it. The last pictures I saw was actually from a couple of years ago, and I promised not to share them, and it's still looking pretty decent shape for what it was.
Yeah. There's some guys that they poured their heart and their soul. Like that's what they're known by, and they're not going to let it go no matter what. And at least he is maintaining it somewhat. I've seen some of them that they're falling apart in the backyard, and that's a real sad state of affairs. But that said, a lot of these trucks now are getting bought up, and they're getting offered enough money that it's worthwhile to let them go. That's when I bought it from Dave. There was one of the things was do not part it out, and he goes, if anybody's going to cut it up, it's going to be me. And I respected that. And I kept him in the loop with the restoration. And Some days he was good. Some days he was happy to see the stuff. And other days he told me to go stuff it. Just depending on what mood he was in. I called and asked him like because we did one of the last things I did with it before we sold it was put it in the Motion Car Show down in Toronto. And or I guess it's Motorama now they call it. And I asked him to come up and hang with the truck for the day. And he thought about it and then declined, unfortunately. But that would have been pretty cool to have him.
That would have been neat for sure to have him be there and see the finished product. But it's also got to be hard for him. That was his pride and joy for a number of years.
Oh,
and
yeah,
he's got a lot of great memories. And
yeah, for sure. And he was going through some personal issues at the time. And I think it might have stirred up memories he didn't want to stir up.
Can you share any interesting stories about Big Bad and Bouncy?
Not really. He was very... it was one of those things where it was, I'm selling it to you, and I just want to forget I had it.
Gotcha.
Or, and then one, like I said, then one days he'd be in a good mood and he'd want to know what's going on, or he'd like, oh, that you really did that you nailed that, or and
that must have made you feel good though on those good days though too, right? When you said, hey, you nailed that.
Yeah. And I'm there too. I sold a truck a while ago that was a big part of history for me. And the kid messaged me wanting to tell me what he'd done to it. And I messaged him back and said, I just don't want to know. I'm sorry, because maybe I'll be surprised to find out that he restored it exactly the way it was. But most people don't do that. They put their own spin on it. Where for me, it's good for good, bad, or otherwise. Some you got to change some stuff. If you find something really horrible, you got to fix it. But if it would be like taking Sasquatch and four-linking it. It just wouldn't be right.
So let's talk about Sasquatch. Basically, it's a car body on tractor tires, and it's an old school mud bogger from Ontario back into the 80s, right?
Yeah, it was built in around 84, 85. It's actually a fiberglass Model A body on a Ford F-150 frame turned upside down, and old school GMC 2.5 tons and 60-inch tall skinny bag tires.
Yeah,
and quite healthy 460 in it, probably somewhere in the 500 plus range, like maybe a 514 or something. I don't really know, but I'm guessing in the 700 horsepower range. It gets up and skedaddles, and that motor is still the original motor that was in it when it in the 80s, and it pumps 80 pounds oil pressure. And I sometimes think I should pull it apart and put bearings in it, but I'm afraid to mess with it.
No, you end up messing with it and you end up getting leaks, or you end up getting other issues.
You don't know what some of these old school guys that built that stuff back in the day. That's 700 horsepower on iron heads. Doesn't even have aluminum heads on it. And what the tricks that they knew, and I don't know those tricks.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
As long as
those are the old guys sitting there. Yeah, those are the old guys sitting there working on it, and they got a cigar hanging out of their mouth. And
I had to rebuild the transmission, and I found a guy over in Barrie it was Simcoe Transmission. I'll give him a plug, but I know he's not really in business anymore. And I plopped the C6 down on his bench, 2-wheel drive, and he looks at it and he says, I haven't seen one of those in 30 years. And apparently it wasn't your average C6. It was out of a snow groomer. And the last one I saw these came out of Mansfield Skiway snow groomer. It's cool. So I said, you know how to work on it? Oh, yeah. And this guy didn't even have a hoist in the shop. He was doing transmissions and cars on the floor. And he pulled that transmission apart and put it back together. He said it was well built, but he says there's some new school tricks that I slipped in there that are different clutches and stuff. And it's a stout transmission. It holds together. So these old guys, they know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Before technology come along, they had to make it work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the scoop with Sasquatch? Obviously, it was raced in the 80s and into the 90s, right?
Yeah, and then it was sold off. It was built by the Shaw brothers, which were two young fellows that were crazy. And at the time, it was unstoppable. Like, they would come out to the county fair mud bogs, and they would just dominate. There was nothing else like it. And I remember it. I remember going there as a young adult and seeing it work and going, man, it would be cool to own that someday. And that's what I said. It's about the history for me. And then all of a sudden, it disappeared for years. Everyone thought it was gone and scrapped and tore apart. And it popped up in an auto auction. And I went down and I was the high bidder. So
That is great. I'm with you. It's all about the history. I would love to get into restoring some of the older race vehicles. I know of a couple race vehicles out in BC here that have been sitting, and they're sitting under a tree or they're sitting in somebody's storage shed. And I would just love to get my hands on and do some restoration on some of these race vehicles from when, like, the 80s and the 90s kind of idea, right?
yeah,
So,
for sure. So yeah, it is, it is exactly as it was ran in the 80s. I've right down, like I haven't even so much as painted it. We did some of the decals right now because I haven't figured out how to get it back off. We put the plastic dip over them because it was actually in a TV show for Discovery Channel where it sounds funny, but they needed an old school mud bogger for a Florida Everglades scene where the guy gets abducted by aliens. So I had to cover up all the original advertisements on it. I left Sasquatch on the sides. They allowed me to do that, but I had to cover up like Joe's transmission and stuff like that. So it's still covered up because I haven't been able to get the plastic dip off.
And you don't want to peel it off because you don't want to wreck the decals behind either.
Yeah. And I was sold a bill of goods. The plastic dip was new then. They said, oh, you just put it on and peel it right off. It's like, yeah, it hasn't worked like that. But yeah, look it up. It's called Swamp Thing on the TV show Close Encounters on Discovery Channel. It's only there for a couple minutes, but you can see it bouncing around. And
that is awesome. I love that.
And yeah, but we still run it to this day. We had it down in Michigan 3 weeks ago, ran it. And it doesn't ride good, but it can hold its own with some of the mega trucks down there, power wise, and going through the mud. So
it's just still the old leaf springs on there, right?
It's actually
like that's what it ran back then.
It actually has coils on it. It has coils and bucket, and for lack of a better term, it's a 3-link setup. It has flex, or like it has pivots at the frame, but they're welded solid to the axles, which, so at today's standards, it doesn't flex very well.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, I'm so stuck in the past and the history. Like I could bring it in the shop and we could put some 16-inch coilovers on it and high joint, but it wouldn't be the same car. You know?
Yeah, there's something about restoring, keeping the vehicle the same, and that's the thing. There's so many new vehicles and ways you can modify a vehicle or build a vehicle from new, but on these older vehicles that we find, we got to restore them or keep them in the same because it's just a part of history, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is really how I feel about it. And I see trucks every day that get modified and changed, and it's like I can't save them all, and I want to, and they get scrapped, and it's why did you do that?
There's been some really neat restorations of monster trucks in the last, I'm going to say, probably 5-6 years.
Yeah, there's been a real takeoff of that. It's a real insurgence back into that and the old pole trucks. And part of that goes back to the Monster Truck Hall of Fame down in Indiana, because they're starting to put on events where you can go and run your old school monster truck, crush some cars, put on the original type show. And that's coming back around. So it's definitely, they're coming back. If you got an old school monster truck, hold on to it, restore it.
Even guys are building them old school style as well, too, right?
That goes back to the mega trucks, thing there in that craze in the States, and it's here too. It's definitely in Canada now. It's about 10 years behind. But yeah, there a lot of those guys were basically building old school monster trucks, leaf sprung on Rockwells and 48s or 66s or whatever, 18426 tractor tires or whatever your taste. And I think that partially brought the resurgence, and they've gone above and beyond now. Like they're taking mega trucks and jumping them further than even some of the new monster trucks at this point. But
yeah, for sure. It really neat seeing a lot of these older monster trucks being restored. And there's, I can't think of the names off some of the top of my head, but you're into it more in some of the Facebook groups than I am. But seeing them pop up these restorations, and there's like even Miss Bigfoot and things like that. There's all kinds of interesting old school monsters.
There's some that are getting restored, but they have to have different names because the original owners just don't want to part with the name. You know,
That's understandable. They spent their life with these names, right? So
yeah.
I get that too a bit. I do want to mention to our Monster Truck listeners that back in March of 23, I interviewed Don Frankish, who had the original Maniac and Jurassic Attack monster trucks. And he is one of the old school guys. This is back into the early 90s when he started with the monster trucks, and then he developed the Jurassic Attack. And that, to our listeners that are interested in monster trucks, go back into March of 2023. And I had a really neat interview with Don Frankish. He started off in truck pulling and then went into the monster trucks. And he's a Canadian icon in regards to the monster truck world as well, too. What are your plans for Sasquatch?
We're just going to keep running her and
Yep.
bringing old school back.
Yep.
So there's an event down in St. Thomas this weekend, and that's probably one of the better events in the area. There isn't very many in Southern Ontario anymore. There's only 2 or 3. I wouldn't even call them sanctioned events, but put on by a park or whatever. So there's St. Thomas Speedway. In the last 2 years, they had 15 acres out behind the drag track that they've made into pits and stuff. And they're trying really hard. Shout out to those guys down in St. Thomas. They're doing some good work. And then there's the Melbourne Mud Madness, which is outside of London. And both those places, they're trying to keep it alive. We lost Sweet Peas Mud Bog in Orangeville this year. It's gone. So there's a few people like my friend Jeremy Bard and myself. We both have acreage. Jeremy's got a drag pit. I've got a play area. So we can't make it big. We can't have 100 trucks, but we can have 15 people over and hang out and have a good time still and just be respectful to each other. And then also, as you said earlier before, like Minden and stuff like that, there's some really good off-roading up there and Bancroft, Ardbeg outside Perry Sound. But again, there's more rocks and climbing.
Yeah. I lived in Ontario from about 2002 till actually 2002 to 2012. And so I remember Sweet Peas quite well. And that was always an interesting place to go for the mud bogs.
If you were there, I was there. I went every year, every event from his first one to 2010 when we brought Trucks Gone Wild there. And I didn't go after that. The owner and I parted ways after Trucks Gone Wild. It's just how it was. We did go back last year for a couple of events just because my son's getting into it and it was local. But unfortunately, we didn't support him there for a while.
It happens, unfortunately. So the other one, too, that I remember going to all the time was Gopher Dunes on Good Friday. They always had a great event there.
Yeah. Again, they're not running it anymore. Melbourne is very much like that. They're actually running theirs on an old golf course. So they have a lot of room to play.
Nice.
Yeah, so definitely the two. If you're in Southern Ontario and you want to go get muck on your truck or you want to take on a bounty hole or whatever, those are 2 really good spots to go. St. Thomas has a Run What You Brung drag race. So if you want to do some side-by-side drags, whether you're in your Jeep Cherokee or whether you're in your Sandrail, they can accommodate that.
Have you been out to Brockville, to the mud pit out there?
I have not. There's a big following of mega trucks out there.
Yeah.
And I've met some of the guys, but I've never actually ventured out that far. And definitely a good show out there as well, for sure.
Yeah.
And
Ani does a good show.
Yeah. And then there's some places up north. I think Timmins has a pretty decent one now too. For me, to either go to Brockville or Timmins, I'm traveling 6-8 hours in one direction. So it would have to be very well coordinated for me to go. I guess you might say I'm semi-retired now from the mud bogging, so I can stay local.
I can't blame you. I used to do that trip from Toronto to Brockville 2 or 3 times a year with the off-road racing guys, the wheel-to-wheel guys. And it's a long haul and it's expensive on fuel, even more so now. And Brockville is always a good time. It had a bit of a reputation as a wild place. And I think that's calmed down a little bit, but I heard it hasn't. But it's always an interesting time.
Yeah, I think mud bogging and partying, I think they do get a little wild. I think they're a little different than your average bear. So
you have to if you enjoy mud.
Yeah. So
So you're still running the big trig. You got a big Super Duty, don't you?
I'm doing a full on mega truck. It's 05 Super Duty, diesel, 2.5 ton Rockwells, 18426 R2s, full 4 link. So it's got FOA coilovers, and it's an okay truck. I can break it pretty easy. I should have went bigger axles. I should have went 5 tons or axle techs, but back then axle techs weren't a thing.
Yeah.
And being naive is, oh my gosh, I'm going from a Dana 60 to a 2.5 ton rock. I won't break that. Snap.
The more confidence you have because you got this upgraded equipment, the harder you go, right?
Yeah. So it's more my cruiser now. I'll take it down to a big event. If I was going to go to Melbourne where there's lots of driving, it's really nice and comfortable, and it pretty much goes wherever I point it. And I like doing recoveries. That's one of my things. I like pulling people out. So I just go around and wait for people to get stuck. And
So you had a Chevy Canyon for a while too, right? Did you end up selling that?
no, I've got it. It's still here.
You still got her. Okay. So what's up the scoop with that one? I love that little rig. I saw some pictures of it a while ago there.
It's in the shop right now. We just pulled the front bumper off of it. We're putting a road armor style front bumper and a 9500 keeper winch on it. I was literally working on that, and I came in the house to do this. But it is probably the most fun truck that I have. It is super capable. It just works so nice, and it surprises the heck out of people. And it still runs. It's a Canyon. It's basically stock. It runs a stock inline 5. But then we 4 linked it. It's 2.5 ton Rockwells, 14-inch coilovers, SCS drop box in it, running 46-inch claws, and it just works great. Yeah. I built it to do rocks. Like, that's my rock buggy, and so I got some friends that are edging me to go to Minden. So that's why I'm putting the winch on it now, because I'm still running open diffs, so I got to be careful on the rocks. If I get flexed out too much, I'll be one wheel spin in the air kind of thing. But I figure if I have a winch, I can get me over that. Minden's a 40-inch tall tire trail pretty much, so I think on 46s and linked, I probably can overcome open diffs.
Yeah, if just take it with the right approach on it. So going back into the history, so what are some of your favorite mud bog, I'm going to say mud bog areas, but also your mud bog pits or events that you used to go to back in the I shouldn't say old days, but
Yeah, we did touch on that. The absolute best was Minisink Swamp and Angus. It was
okay.
back in the 80s. You'd show up there on a Saturday morning, and there'd be 50 trucks heading back in, and you'd go in a convoy. And basically you went back in about 5-6 miles till you got to this, what they called the Willow Creek, and you couldn't go beyond that. You just couldn't get through the creek. Like, it wasn't really a creek. And you would follow the Nottawasaga River, and a lot of times they would go in. They had campers made up, but if their truck was running 44s, they'd have campers on 40s, and they'd pull them in behind them, little campers, and they'd camp overnight. But the trick was, if you knew there was rain coming, you got out of there, because it was the floodplains for the Nottawasaga River. And if the floodplains overflowed and those ruts filled up with water, there was some of the ruts where you were touching dirt when you reached out your window on 44s. So if they filled up with water, you weren't getting out. And then back in the heyday, Sweet Peas was awesome. Collingwood always had a great drag pit. I don't know if you ever went to Collingwood to watch their races. There was some really good racing there. Those are probably the ones that I missed the most.
What is it about the mud that you love?
It's the challenge. It's the challenge of getting through it, and that sheer horsepower, and the smell of mud burning on your exhaust, and that when you're spinning and the big chunks of grass coming down and thunking on your roof. It's just something cathartic about that for me.
I get it.
It's no different than climbing a good rock face like that. Yeah. Because I've done it. I've been passenger in Utah and done Moab, and so I have a taste for it. The mud draws me back. It's like they say, mud is, you get suctioned up in the mud. And I guess I'm suctioned.
Everybody has their vice, right? Whether you're a rock crawler or a mud bogger or high speed. I love the high speed stuff. So everybody has their vice, and it just pulls you right back in.
Yeah. The funny thing is, if you look at my eclectic group of trucks, I pretty much have a truck that can do any one of those things. And I did have the Canyon for sale for a while, and I was going to go out to BC. There was a guy that wanted it out there, and to be totally honest, I got cold feet. I didn't sell it to him because I was just afraid that the truck wasn't up to the standards. And I know it is, but he asked me so many questions, and because I was shipping it out there, I didn't want it to go out there and then have him go, "This guy sold me a piece of junk," or "It's not what I expected," and I just kept it.
Yep. The one nice thing we've got up in BC is the access to snow, because I know there's a lot of trails are shut down in the snow in the winter over there. Is snow wheeling that everything that you ever considered?
I have done snow wheeling. I've actually put on snow wheeling events at my property here where I've got a 15-acre field, and we wait till about January when it's full of snow, and then we just have at it. We did a lot back in the day, like I said, when we were on the trucks on 44s, we did a lot of snow wheeling on the summer road onlys.
Yeah.
Love it. But today we don't get enough snow really to justify it now. And as most of those roads have been taken up by snowmobile trails, OFSC, and we want to be respectful to the snowmobilers. Their season's short enough as it is without us going and messing up their trails.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So is there anything that we missed that you wanted to talk about, Mike?
I think we've pretty much covered it all. As I said, the big thing for me was about history, and I did touch on that truck I said I sold and didn't want to hear about anymore. That truck there was one that popped up. I like buying my old truck back. When I was young, and as I said, they would go into Menacing Swamp all the time. There was a group of mutters out of Collingwood, and every Sunday they would head down, and they would come down through Creemore and out through what they called Bear Alley. And if you go on my YouTube channel, there's some videos of us with my yellow Ford Mud Dancer truck in Bear Alley. So some great wheeling even in there. And then they would truck over and go to that Menacing Swamp. And the leader was a guy who had it was a 69 Ford on groundhogs, 44-inch groundhogs. And he called it the Swamp Donkey. And it had a big 20-ton Braden PTO winch on it, and he was the man. He was the guy who led the parade in and the parade out.
Yeah.
And a guy called me up one day, and he says he was into cars, and he says, "I took this truck on trade," and he says, "It's not what I'm into." Sent me a picture, and I said, "I'll be down there in half an hour." I went down, and it was on 42-inch swampers, and it was 351 Windsor, twin 205 transfer cases, granny low 4-speed, Dana 60s, the whole works. And I bought that too. And brought home, we put 44 swampers on it. And I really did love that truck, but unfortunately there were some circumstances that arose that we had to part ways with it. But that truck there was, if anyone were to say what really truly got me into four-wheeling, was when I was that kid sitting on the side of the road with my dad's Mazda covered in mud and watching those guys roll through town with those big trucks. It was like, yeah, one day that's going to be me one day. So I have had the opportunity to roll downtown with that truck.
That is so cool to be able to do that with a truck that inspired you.
Yeah. So like I said, the big thing is get out there, grab that old school truck, and they're cool. You don't need all the bells and whistles and to have fun. You just get out there and be part of it.
Exactly. Trish and I talk a lot about the people with the whole overlanding scene and stuff like that these days. And I'm going to the BC Overland Rally this weekend, and I know there's going to be rigs out there that are $150,000, and I'm showing up in my Toyota Tacoma that I've got maybe $3,000 or $4,000 of accessories onto, and I'm just as happy as those guys are. So you don't have to dump a whole bunch of money to go out and enjoy four-wheeling. So
and that's something I'm interested in. Like, I've watched some of the stuff where they're going up through Alaska and they're taking the 4-day treks or whatever. And I would love to do that with the Canyon. I'd put a cap on it, and it's built the way I built it is everything is the same bolt ends. If I break a 4-link bar, it's the same. That same bar is the same on the front as it is the rear. My drive shafts are the same lengths. And it would just, I think it would be a really good rig to go on, like on an overlanding adventure or one of those tough truck challenges where you're gone for several days to do it. And one day I'll find one and maybe I'll venture out that way and I'll try it.
You're always welcome here. We've got lots of good trails out in BC for sure. So always welcome out here. One of the last questions that we ask our guests, and I have to admit that I didn't give you a warning on this. I forgot to put that into the email, but one of the last questions that we ask our guests is, what Canadian would you like to listen to on the 4x4 Canada podcast?
That's a really interesting question. I'd be interested to hear what Neil Harrison has to say. No relation to me, but I think he has the 4-wheel drive shop over there, and it's either in BC or Alberta. And he's done some pretty innovative stuff with axles and stuff like that. I think he would be a knowledgeable guy to talk to. I don't know if you're aware of him or not.
Yeah, I know of Neil. I haven't talked to him myself, but I know of him. And he does all the Rockwell stuff, right?
Yes, he's a big Rockwell guy, and
yeah,
very knowledgeable. I think his content might not be for everybody, but I think that it's definitely be something interesting. And
for sure, he everything I've heard about him has been really positive, and like you say, his knowledge, he knows these things inside and out. We had Kyle Walton on a while ago too. He's with the Mega Trucks here in Alberta, and he mentioned Neil as well too. Another good suggestion for sure.
Yeah, somebody else that would be interesting is, I don't know if you're aware of Tim Dahlner, he's a rock crawl guy from over here. He's in Ontario.
Okay.
And I've actually went to California. We did the Top Truck Challenge for 4-Wheeler Magazine and did Moab. He's done King of the Hammers. He just went out west and did, excuse me, I don't know the event names, but one of the big events out west, and to qualify for the Hammers again.
Yeah.
And he's, again, very knowledgeable, been wheeling for as long as I have. And he's got some interesting stories too. And he's a rock guy. He started out as a mudder, but he converted over real easy.
There's something to it when you're talking hammers and stuff like that. There's definitely a thrill there, right? You're hitting rocks, but you also get a little bit of speed in there too. So yeah, I can understand that. So you guys went down to the 4-Wheeler Magazine Top Truck Challenge together?
Yep.
How was that?
It was a very interesting experience. I didn't want to touch too much on the state stuff because this is a Canadian podcast, but yeah, it was on my bucket list. It was amazing. I went as pit crew. I didn't ride in the trucks. But I hauled down 2 rigs. There was 2 of us from Ontario it was actually 3 trucks that year that got picked from Ontario, and I hauled 2 of them down. One for Josh Hall, who's now out in Alberta, and then Tim Dahlner's buggy. And just to get to watch the rigs work and to see the tank trap in person, and it's unfortunate that they no longer do that event. It was challenging, and the magazine didn't do it justice. It was tough. And it was tough on equipment. And really glad I went. Like, it definitely was worth it.
Yeah, I know a few of the guys from Alberta that have been down. And yeah, they say it was always a really neat event, but they said it was a lot harder than what they expected.
Yeah, they made the tank trap out to be the worst. And I think it might have been one of the easier events, really.
Especially for you mud guys, too. If you guys are usually running in mud half the time, and you're used to some of that stuff, right? Whereas a lot of the rock crawl guys aren't.
Yeah, you had to be used to body damage. In some of the earlier videos, you saw guys take really pretty trucks there, and they come out just beat the snot. Yeah, I could never do that. But we take, what we were running, like rock buggies and truggies and stuff like that, and they worked really well there, and they performed. We didn't win it by any means, but I think everybody came out a winner just by being there. So,
for the fun of it, for sure. I think we pretty much covered everything tonight, Mike.
Yeah, hopefully I told you what you wanted and got you what you needed. And
yeah, for sure.
Made you laugh, made you cry.
Once again, we're talking with Mike Harrison. He is from Ontario and restored the Big Bad and Bouncy monster truck, and he's got the Sasquatch old school mudder as well. And check him out at Mud Dancer Farms on YouTube. And they got a lot of really good old school mud bog videos, and definitely worth checking out their YouTube channel for sure. So awesome, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on tonight. It's been a good chat. I've been talking over years over Facebook and all that stuff, but it's finally good to put a face to the name. And
yeah, no, I was really excited when you asked me to participate, and And it makes me feel honored. It makes you feel like what I've been doing actually means something, and that it inspires people to enjoy it and or enjoy hearing the stories. There's so many of them. I could put you on a group chat with about 5 guys, and we could chew your ear off for a few hours.
It's funny. Once we get talking, sometimes I find it quite interesting. You could end up talking all night, right? So
Yeah.
all the stories start bouncing around, but that's half the fun of it. And that's one of the reasons I started the podcast, was to take some of this history, whether it be from the monster truck side or the off-road racing side. And it eventually, a lot of this stuff, if we don't record this kind of stuff, a lot of these stories are going to be gone.
And that's where our Facebook page comes in as well. Like, we have some newer stuff, the stuff that we're doing now and stuff as well. But the VHS tapes were starting to decay. They were starting to. So
Yeah.
if you do go to my page, some of it's a little hard to watch. It's grainy, it's fuzzy, it's staticky. But we did the best that we could do to try and save it, because in
Yep.
3 or 4 years, those tapes would be unwatchable. So at least now they're documented and up there for people to see, and are what they are. And I've talked to a lot of my friends, and over time they drag out their old tapes and give it to me, and we will be posting more. It's a lengthy process because we have to convert them from VHS over to digital, and we're
Yeah.
running them through an enhancer to try and improve them. So you'll see that the first ones we put up aren't as good as we progress, because we've gotten better equipment and different programs and stuff. So it's the same. If anybody's got any old videos that they'd post it up and don't want to go through the trouble, get hold of me. We'd gladly post them on our channel and give you the credit.
Yeah. That's great, because that's one of the things, same idea as podcasts, is whether YouTube channels and that, is we got to save some of this history. And it goes right back to the monster trucks too, right? We got to save some of this history. And I know you and I are both on the same level. We both love this old school stuff. But it's just sad to see some of it disappear. So there's so much stories that can be told through, whether it be the videos or whether it be through the podcasts now.
Yeah. I'd love to come back on and chat with you more sometime, or if you got a group of people that you think I might fit into, I'd be more than happy to jump in and give my 2 cents worth. And
Definitely. But awesome, Mike. I really appreciate you coming on tonight. I know it's later over there for you in Ontario, but I really enjoyed the chat. I could talk about history all night long, but eventually we got to call it quits sometime.
Yeah, we do. And I might go back out to the shop for a little bit. Yeah, I'm not, maybe not that bad.
Awesome. I really appreciate you coming on, Mike. And once again, Mike Harrison from Mud Dancer Farms on YouTube. Go back, check out some of these old cool stuff. And also check out on Facebook or Google for Big Bad Bouncy. You can see that monster truck that we were talking about. Absolutely gorgeous. I fell in love with it. You did a wonderful job on it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on.
No problem. I appreciate you. Thanks, Mike.